And now we have our final talk. It will be given by Professor Vasiukov, and it will be devoted to the theme Wittgensteinian intentional AI, artificial intelligence. So, Vladimir Leonidovich, you are welcome.
Thank you very much. Just a moment. Okay, we'll have okay, briefly, the way we can apply Wittgenstein's ideas in the system of artificial intelligence is proposed. It is shown how they should facilitate overcoming deadlocks on Heideggerian artificial intelligence based on Martin Heidegger's philosophy. Modifying the concept of intentionality formulated by John Searle, the hypothetic model of Wittgensteinian intentional artificial intelligence is described, which is based on the combination of logical and deductive systems. Brief outline. Firstly, we will speak about the Heideggerian artificial intelligence, then on Wittgenstein's logic and world relation, then on intentionality and logical approach, and then trying to modify, in a sense, Searle and doctrine of intentionality, and then speak about attentional attitude and artificial intelligence, finally on intentional artificial intelligence. So we start. Hubert Dreyfus in his paper, Why Heideggerian Artificial Intelligence is Felt and How Fixing It Would Require Making It More Heideggerian, he posits the history of elaboration of artificial intelligence systems, which in a nutshell should be described as a continuity of the following stages. First stage is a convergence of computers and philosophy, cognitive simulation. Newell and Simon claim that both digital computers and the human mind could be understood as a physical symbol systems, using strings of beats or streams of neuron pulses as symbols representing the external world. Intelligence, they claim, merely required making the appropriate inferences from these internal representations. They had taken over Hobbes' claims that reasoning was calculating, Descartes' mental representations, Leibniz's idea of a universal characteristics, a set of primitives in which all knowledge could be expressed, Kant's claims that concepts were rules, Frege's formalization of such rules, and Russell's postulation of logical atoms as the building blocks of reality. In short, without realizing it, artificial intelligence researchers were hard at work, turning a rationalist philosophy into a research program. The second stage was briefly described by Dreyfus as symbolic artificial intelligence as degenerating research program. Researchers were running up against the problem of representing significance and relevance, a problem that Heidegger saw was implicit in Descartes' understanding of the world as a set of meaningless facts to which the mind assigned what Descartes called values and John Searle now called functions. But Heidegger warned values are just more meaningless facts. To say a hammer has a function of being a hammering leaves out the defining relation of hammers to nails and other equipment, to the points of building things and to the skills required when actually using the hammer, all of which reveals the way of being of the hammer, which Heidegger called readiness to hand. Here the problem arises how the computer should act while having no idea of the relevance of his knowledge. Marvin Minsky suggested that to avoid this problem, one could use what's called frames. Description of typical situation, structure of essential features, and default assignments. A structure whose theory was already proposed and already called a frame. In the 60s and early 70s, artificial intelligence programs were limited to micro worlds, artificial situations in which a small number of features that were possibly relevant was determined beforehand. It was supposed that micro-values could be made more realistic and covered common sense knowledge. There were, however, no successful follow-up. Even Terry Winograd's special knowledge representation language wasn't working. John Hughes referred to the symbolic artificial intelligence of that period as good old-fashioned artificial intelligence, and that name has been widely accepted as capturing its current status. The next stage was Heideggerian artificial intelligence, eliminating representation by building behavior-based robots. Terry Winograd became the first high-profile dissertation from the program of good old-fashioned AI, who began including Heidegger in his computer science courses at Stanford. Also, Rodney Brooks' behaviorist approach implicitly accepted Heidegger's critique of Cartesian internalist representations. He reported that based on the idea that the best model of the world is the world itself, he had developed a different approach in which a mobile robot uses the world itself as its own representation, continually referring to its sensors rather than to an internal world model like animals. Moreover, Brooks and Daniel Dennett decided to leap ahead and build a humanoid robot. But yet, at the beginning of artificial intelligence research, Joshua Barhill called this way of thinking the first step fallacy. He said, it's like claiming that the first monkey that climbed a tree was making progress towards flight to the moon. Next stage, Heideggerian stage 2, is programming the ready to hand. The new stage of artificial intelligence elaborations starts when Dreyfus, in his talk at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, acquainted artificial intelligence researchers with Heidegger's non-representational account of the absorption of Dasein, human being, in the world, and two modes of being, the readiness to hand of equipment when they are involved in using it, as a presence at hand of objects when they contemplate them. This new approach took the form of Phil Egger's and David Chapman's program. Egger used what he called deictic representations, which are based on a rough analogy with Heidegger's analysis of everyday intentionality. He designates not a particular object in the world, but rather a role that an object might play in a certain time-extended pattern of interaction between an agent and its environment. The next stage was pseudo-Heideggerian artificial intelligence, embedded, embodied, extended mind. The next stage, and simultaneously the step away, have been Walter Freeman's cognitive model of the brain as a non-linear dynamical system to have shown what the brain is doing, to provide the material substrate for Heidegger phenomenological account of everyday perception and action. The states of the model are representations of brain states, of the features of things in the everyday world. Freeman's model is not intention of being, only a description of such. This will be the new paradigm for the cognitive sciences that Will proposes to present in his book, but which he fails to find. Nevertheless, Walter Freeman's neurodynamics offers a radically new basis for a Heideggerian approach to human intelligence. Dreyfus ends up the history of Heideggerian artificial intelligence considering how supposedly Heideggerian approaches to AI and to artificial intelligence avoid rather than solve the framed problem. The matter of fact is that that Marvin Minsky was convinced that representing a few million of facts about objects, including their functions, would solve what he had come to be called the common sense knowledge problem. But the deep problem was storing millions of facts. It was knowing which facts were relevant in any given situation. If the computer is running a representation of the current state of the world, and something in the world changes, how does the program determine which of its represented facts can be assumed to have stayed the same, and which would have to be updated? And it's obvious, that artificial intelligence program using frames to organize millions of meaningless facts so as to retrieve the currently relevant ones was going to be caught in a regress of frames that recognize the relevant frames for recognizing relevant facts. And then, therefore, the frame problem wasn't just a problem, but was a sign that something was seriously wrong with the whole approach. But now let us return exactly in this situation to remind Wittgenstein what Wittgenstein wrote in his Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, namely, point 1.1, the world is a totality of facts, not of things. The world is determined by the facts and by the being of facts. The second, 1.11. One might cope with endless world of using logic. Logic pervades the world. The limits of the world are also its limit. And further in 6.30, logic is not a body of doctrine, but a mirror image of the world. Logic is transcendental. And finally, 6.124, the propositions of logic describe the scaffolding of the world, or rather, they represented it. From it follows that using of logical constructs provides not only the presence of the global superframe, what is making by the whole logic, but besides allows depict concrete world structures to model perceptions and activity. On the face of it, seems that Wittgensteinian logical approach had to be reconciled with the context dependence featuring human memory. Riemann wrote in this connection, context dependence is an essential property of the cerebral memory system, in which each new experience must change all of the existing store by some small amount in order that a new entry be incorporated and fully deployed in the existing body of experience. This property contrasts with memory stores in computer, in which each item is positioned by an address or a branch of a such tree. There, each item has a compartment and new items don't change the old ones. But if we recall natural deduction system in which, for example, inference on multiplicative formulas block some subproofs, making impossible further using of blocked formulas, then they exactly meet Freeman's sub-descriptions requirement of that each new state transition initiates the construction of logical patterns that impinge on and modifies the whole intentional structure. The next problem is the explication of intentionality in logical approach. Heideggerian artificial intelligence on the state 2 was based on a rough analogy with Heidegger's analysis of objective intentionality, corresponding to the present at hand, and deictic intentionality corresponding to the ready to hand. Following this pattern, we can explore John Searle's analysis of relationship between the intentional state and the object of state of affairs that in some sense directed at. Several distinguish a representative content and the psychological mode of manner in which one has that representative content. He symbolizes the common structure of intentionality as S of P, where the S marks the psychological mode and the P the propositional or intentional content. They should be distinguished, since one and the same propositional content can occur in diverse psychological modalities. Intentional states with propositional content might either represent the fact or to be contrary to fact. The way they should represent the fact is established just by the psychological modality. From the logical point of view, Searle's formula should be constructed as a second-order predication, where psychological content is some property of a propositional content. The second-order description imitates a correlation of mental and physical brain states. If to recollect an issue of psychological dualism. It serves to correct a mistake underlies cognitive science pointed by Searle, which lies in that from the very beginning, the brain has been considered by cognitivists as a computer and mind was treated as a computer program. But mind should not be a program because syntactic processes or working program having no semantic content. But in case of artificial intelligence, the contrary deal exactly with the mind program. And thus, Searle's definition of intentionality should be modified. It should take proper account of a parallel but an independent release of a program and functioning of syntactical processes in computer simulating philosophical dualism. The definition of intentionality by means of predicating was a result of pursuit of intentionality theorists to implement more general conception of a junction, correlating of physical and psychical and physical processes. However, there exist other, more abstract ways of using logical properties and aspects. One is the product construction of logical systems that could be used for our purpose. A logical system obtained as the project of two systems should be characterized as a logic where formulas are the pairs of formulas and inferences are the pairs of inferences in two initial systems. Formally, it means that formulas are the pairs A1, A2, while B1, B2 follows from A1, A2 when B1 is a consequence of A1 in the framework of its system, and B2 is a consequence of A2 or in the framework of other systems, respectively. As the inference B1 from A1, inference 1 inference with the index 1, in our case, is intended for modeling a causal deconnection of physical states where the inference, the second inference from A2 to B2 should be conceived as a mental consequence relation, connection of mental states different from causal linking. That is, psychophysical dualism is modeled by coupling these two kinds of inference in one, or to put it more precisely, in the pair of inferences, A, inference 1, inference 2. Such techniques allow to find for the pair of logic some integrated logical system which will possess all property determined by the construction of a pair of formulas. In the framework of such approach, we hypothetically should describe even certain kind of intentional intellectual intuition, considering the sequence of inferences of pair of A1, B2 from A1, B1, then pair of B2, A1, A1, B3 from A1, B2, and so on, as describing the situation of moment, so to say, momentary judgment, when a psychological state is fixed. You see that there nothing changed. From A1 is full of A1 and 1 and 1 and so on, while the propositional content is changing in such a way that a consequence of inferences B2 from B1, B3 from B2, and so on is occur. The other way around, a sequence of inferences, a sequence of inferences of such a kind as A2, B1 from the A1, B1, A3, B1 from A2, from A pair A2, B1, will be a description of converse intentionality, so to say, when fixed propositional content causes the shift of psychological state by way of the consequence of inferences. It should be comprehended as an answer to the question about the impact of our thinking activity on the causal thinking of physical states. That is, as a description of some mechanism of body handling, a converse linking of mind and body. Programming of such kind of inference sequences provides as a result a logical description of functioning of Wittgensteinian intentional artificial intelligence, modeling two levels of mind, causal physics and mental one. This model, in fact, requires a modification of Searle's representation of intentionality. Searle's formula is rewriting as a pair of SP, or more precisely as a collection of pairs SI and PI, where SI is a psychological state and PI is a respective propositional content. And if we wish to take into consideration the neurobiological cognitivistic approach, then we should construe not pairs but triples, and SY, PY, where that element and Y models a physical state of the memory stores, an analog to human neuron. A descriptive character of intentionality in this case is comprehended in a description of the state of memories stored a pair SIPI. Indeed, in the knowledge of such Wittgensteinian artificial intelligence is not necessarily one. It rather could be conceived as a Daniel Dennett's extended inhuman intentionality, and we use intellectual attitudes always when there is a need of better and more effective explanation and prediction of system behavior, supposing the presence of goal and capability to achieve it in each system. Doing so, we in fact resort to the game putting of pairs NIC as SI instead of the psychological state SI, and consider the intentionality just as determined by our goals and experience. The role of a propositional content of such a kind of intentionality should play, for example, the strategies of computation, and we can consider the transition from one strategy to another in terms of logical system. The only question is the nature of logical system rendering the behavior NI, since it is unclear what kind of logic could be available for this purpose. Logic deals with reasoning and not with a causal process. Nevertheless, there are some kind of logical systems, usually called post system or deductive systems, firstly introduced in 1943 by American logician of Polish origin, Emil Post. He discovered that during the process of our reasoning, we can concentrate just on the inference rules themselves and need not pay account to the kind of proposition used. Then rules become simply some rules of obtaining one abstract object from another in the framework of quasi-logical systems. in the framework of quasi-logical systems. Those systems need to be replica of logical reasonings and can live their own life, driven by their own requirements. General class of such deductive system should be studied while putting aside the specificity of formal system. For example, one can consider a set of all possible evolutionary descendants of fixed initial individual J, regarding an individual completely defined by his genotype, being the word in respective alphabet, where evolution step will be a birth of each fertile mutant. A deductive system describing different mutations leading to a fertile mutant will be the system with an axiom J and some rules of inference. In case of evolution of the word A, B under three admissible types of mutations, so to say, this rule look like that. First polyploidy, when we from P obtain P sequence PP. Second deletion one, when from the P by A, B, Q, we obtain P, B, B, Q. That is, we delete A. And the set P, when deletion two, when the P from the sequence P, A, B, B, Q, we obtain sequence P, A, B, Q. That is deleting one of B. Many modern systems of non-classical logic are precisely systems of such a kind. For example, quantum logic. Anyhow, nothing shall prevent us from exploitation of deductive systems for causal level of causal level of our Wittgensteinian intentional artificial intelligence, describing the linking of elements and I. Choosing any two pure logical systems as candidates for rendering the context of SI and PI, we then constructed the system equivalent to the product logic of triples and ISI-PI, which would be applied in system of Wittgensteinian intentional artificial intelligence. And concrete form of intentionality then is represented by the inverse decomposition of formulas on the triples of formulas and triples of respective inferences. So that's that. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you.